Hi class, it's me, Mrs. Ross. We are going to continue reading Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. We are currently on chapter 11. It's called The Miracle. Ready? Here we go. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. On foggy mornings, Charlotte's Web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery, like a delicate veil. Even Larvae, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came to the pig to give the pigs breakfast. He noted how clearly it showed up, and he noted how big and carefully built it was. And then he took another look and saw something that made him set the pail down. There in the corner of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was the message. It said, "Some pig." Larvae felt weak. He brushed his hands across his eyes and stared harder at Charlotte's web. "I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and he uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you better come down to the pig pen," he said. "What's the trouble?" said Mr. Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with the pig?" Not exactly," said Larvae. "Come and see for yourself." The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Larvae pointed to the spider's web. "Do you see what I see?" he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing on the web. Then he mumbled the words. "Some pig. Then he looked at Larvae. Then they both began to tremble. Charlotte, very sleepily after her night's exertion, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. "Some pig," muttered Larvae in a low voice. "Some pig," whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur. Then they stared at Charlotte. "You don't suppose that spider," began Mr. Zuckerman. But he shook his head. He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, he solemnly walked back to the house and spoke to his wife. "Edith, something has happened," he said in a weak voice. He went into the living room and sat down, and Mrs. Zuckerman followed. "I've got something to tell you, Edith," he said. "You better sit down." Mrs. Zuckerman sank into her chair. She looked pale and frightened. "Edith," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think you had best be told that we have a very unusual pig." A look of complete bewilderment came over to Mrs. Zuckerman's face. "Homer Zuckerman, what on earth are you talking about?" she said. "This is a very serious thing, Edith," he replied. "Our pig is completely out of the ordinary." "What's unusual about this pig?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who was beginning to recover from her scare. "Well, I don't really know yet," said Mr. Zuckerman, "but we've received a sign, Edith, a mysterious sign. A miracle has happened on this farm. There's a large spider web in the doorway of the barn, right over the pig pen, and when Larvae went to feed the pig this morning, he noticed the web because of the fogginess. And you know how spider webs look very distinct in the fog. The right sprung in the middle of the web. There are these words, 'Some pig.'" The words were woven right there. They were actually part of the web, Edith. "I know, because I've been down there, and I've seen it. It says 'some pig,' just as clear can be. There is no mistake about it. A miracle has happened, and a sign has occurred here on earth, right on our farm, that we have no ordinary pig." "Well," said Mrs. Zuckerman, "it seems to me you're a little off. It seems to me that we have no ordinary spider." "Oh no," said Zuckerman. "It's the pig that's unusual. It says right in the middle of the web." "Maybe so," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Just the same, I intend to have a look at the spider." "It's just a common gray spider," said Zuckerman. They got up and together they walked down to Wilbur's yard. "You see, Edith, it's just a common gray spider." Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Larvae was still standing there, and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman, all three, stood for about an hour, reading the words on the web over and over, watching Wilbur. Charlotte was delighted with the way that her trick was working. She sat without moving one muscle and listened to the conversation of the people. When the small fly blundered onto the web, just beyond the words pig, Charlotte dropped quickly down, rolled the fly up, and carried it out of the way. After a while, the fog lifted and the web dried off, and the words didn't show up as plainly as before. The Zuckermans and Larvae walked back to the house. Just before they left the pig pen, Mr. Zuckerman took one more look at Wilbur. "You know," he said in a very important voice, "I've thought all along that this pig of ours is extra good one. He's a solid pig. That pig is solid as it comes." "You notice how solid he is around the shoulders?" said Larvae. Sure I do," said Larvae. "I've always noticed that pig. He's quite a pig." "He's long and he's smooth," said Zuckerman. "That's right," said Larvae. "He's as smooth can come. He's some pig." When Mr. Zuckerman got back to the house, he took off his work clothes and put on his best suit. Then he got in his car and drove to the minister's house. He stayed for an hour and explained to the minister the miracle that had happened on the farm. "So far," said Mrs. Zuckerman, "only 4 people on earth know about this miracle. Myself, my wife, and my hired man, Larvae. And you." "Don't tell anyone else," said the minister. "We don't know what this means yet. But perhaps if I give thought to it, I can explain it in my sermon next Sunday. There can be no doubt that you have a most unusual pig. I intend to speak about it in my sermon and point out the fact that this community has been visited by a wondrous animal. By the way, does the pig have a name?" "Why, yes. My little niece calls him Wilbur. She's a rather interesting child, full of notions. She raised the pig on a bottle, and I bought him from her when he was just a month old." He shook hands with the minister and he left. Secrets are hard to keep. Long before Sunday came, the news spread all over the county. Everyone knew that the sign had appeared in the spider's web on Zuckerman's place. Everyone knew that the Zuckermans had a wondrous pig. People came from miles around to look at Wilbur and to read the words on Charlotte's web. The Zuckermans' driveway was always filled with cars, trucks from morning till night, Fords and Chevys and Buicks, Roadmasters, GMC pickups, Plymouths, all of them. The news of the wondrous pig spread clear into the hills. The farmers came rattling down in buggies and buckboards to stand for hour after hour at Wilbur's pen, admiring the miraculous animal. All said they had never seen such a pig in their lives. When Ferd told her mother that Avery had tried to hit the Zuckerman spider with a stick, Mrs. Arable was shocked. She ended up sending Avery to bed without any supper as a punishment. In the days that followed, Mr. Zuckerman was so busy entertaining visitors that he neglected his farm. He wore his good clothes all the time and got right into them when he got up in the morning. Mrs. Zuckerman prepared special meals for Wilbur. Larvae shaved, he got a haircut, and his principal farm duty was to now feed the pig while people looked on. Mr. Zuckerman ordered Larvae to increase Wilbur's feeding to 3 meals a day. Now it was 4 meals a day. The Zuckermans were so busy visiting that they forgot that the other animals were even on the farm. that the other animals were on the farm. The blackberries got ripe, and Mrs. Zuckerman failed to pick the blackberries to make her jam. The corn needed hoeing, and Larvae didn't have any time to hoe it. On Sunday, the church was full. The minister explained the miracle. He said that the words on the spider's web proved that human beings must always be on watch for the coming of wonders. All in all, the Zuckerman's pig pen was the center of attention. Fern was happy, for she felt that Charlotte's trick was working and that Wilbur's life would be saved. But she found that the barn was not nearly as pleasant. Too many people. She liked it better when she could be alone with all of her friends, the animals. Next, we're going to be reading chapter 12, which is called A Meeting. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Bye.